And then Paul McCartney came into the picture, and
That was my very next question. How does Paul McCartney come into the picture? How does a Beatle get involved with Destiny?
All right, well, let's just go back just a little bit. There was a point when we were all watching E3, when Joe Staten came out to show ODST and also announced that Reach was just around the corner. And so we watched him do that. We had done a trailer for that and a whole show for that. And Joe left the stage, and then Beatles Rock Band was being introduced.
Right.
The very next thing that came out were Paul and Ringo on
yeah.
stage. And I remember watching that on TV back here, and I was like, wow, look how close we came to the Beatles. Like, they were on stage right after Joe Staten. And I thought that would be the closest I'd ever come to the Beatles. Well, then we start working on Destiny, and a guy named Lev Chapelski from a company named Blind Light in Los Angeles, who had been a guy and a company that helped us get different voiceover talent over the years. He has really good connections. That's how we got, Keith David and Ron Perlman and Nathan Fillion and, Tricia Helfer and Katie Sackhoff and all these people. Anyway, he called me, and he and his assistant called and said, hey, we were sitting here wondering, you've done the Nile Rodgers thing, you've done Steve Vai, you've done these actors. What would be the next cool thing for Marty to do on this new thing? I'm like, oh, well, hey, I'm glad you're thinking about me. Thanks, Lev. And so he says, what do you think about Paul McCartney? So this is the very beginning of 2011, and I'm like, yeah, Lev, that's great. I mean, yeah, knock yourself out. I said, well, first thing I said was like, well, what, do you have a connection with Paul McCartney? And he goes, no. And I'm like, okay, well. I said, why are you even thinking him? And he says, well, we saw him come out at E3, and it looked like he was interested in the fact that he was getting a whole new fan base based on the video games.
Right.
And we all know that Paul likes to explore new mediums. And so I thought, well, that's a long shot, but sure, go ahead. And over the next few months, apparently he figured out how to get a hold of Paul McCartney's people.
Wow.
So at GDC in 2011, I was doing a keynote, and Lev came up to me right before I was about to do my keynote thing. And believe it or not, the keynote that year I was doing was the design and audio keynote combined, which if Jamie knew that, he'd be laughing, because why I'm doing a design keynote is hilarious. But anyway, it was brilliant, just for the record.
Of course.
Lev came up to me just before I was introduced, and he said, Marty, I got the meeting. And I said, what meeting? He says, well, the meeting with Paul. And then and now Marty O'Donnell. I'm like, my brain was just exploding. So I sure enough, he did. So like 2 weeks later, I was flying to LA to have a 20-minute meeting with Paul McCartney. And
are you super nervous at that point?
Oh, I was ridiculously nervous.
I mean, you're an accomplished guy in your field, but you're getting a one-on-one
But, like you said, I was going to be nervous. I was nervous. As a matter of fact, even just flying down to have a meeting with Paul McCartney, I already thought that was like the pinnacle, because the fact that I was scheduled to meet with him was just good enough. But I really didn't think he was going to show up. So I was told it was the end of his day. He had 20 minutes to give. So sure enough, he walks in and he goes, hello, it's me. And I was just like, wow, it is. It's actually Paul McCartney. So he was really gracious. We sat down, we talked. He had his bagel and tea. And I started showing him, like, here's how music in games works, here's some stuff. And then he started asking me questions, and we talked about music, and then we started talking about kids and grandchildren, and 2 hours went by.
Wow.
And I remember thinking to myself, well, that's longer than he was expected to be here. So once we were done, I stood up and I went over to shake his hand, and he just came over like, oh no, come on, and he gives me this big hug. And I thought, okay, well, that's a good first date. That maybe something will come of this. And sure enough, yeah, he almost immediately wanted to start working on music, and we started trading music back and forth. You know what I should do? Maybe I could do this for you. One of the things I'll give you, which I haven't given to anybody, is a Paul McCartney voice message that I have on my phone.
That would be cool.
Hello, Marty. This is Paul from England, which is, we'll see how good an imitation that was. But
hey, Marty, it's Paul here calling from England. Just to let you know that I've had a chance to listen to the piece you sent back, and I really like it. I think it's really cool. So I think it's a good direction, and I like what you've done with it. You put, a few of the constituents together, and I think it works very well. So there you go. I was just hoping to say that in person to you, but I've said it to your machine, so consider this as being in person. All right. See you. Bye-bye.
It was the only time he left a voice message, because from then on I picked up my phone whatever time of day it was ringing, because I never knew. But it was funny because he said Paul from England. I'm like, oh yeah, that Paul. Like, I don't even think he even realizes how recognizable his voice is. But we worked together for like the next 2 years, and Mike and I went to New York, and we worked with his band.
What does Mike say when you call him?
Oh, at that point, Mike was in Chicago still, and I had told him, I said, Mike, don't tell anybody, but I'm actually maybe going to have a meeting with Paul McCartney. And this is the funny thing was, for years at our studio, we would tell our secretary that we had, our receptionist, we would say, hold all the calls unless it's Spielberg. That was the funny thing to say. But it never occurred to, we might have said, hold our calls unless it's McCartney, but we wouldn't even, that would be like sacrilegious.
Right.
We would never even use a Beatle as a joke, because it was like, so that was so out of reach. So Mike he just couldn't believe it. It's like, there's no way this is happening.
How does he not get to come along too? He's your partner.
Well, because Mike was still in Chicago. At this point, 2011, Mike hadn't moved out here yet.
He doesn't get on a plane and come.
I know.
Meeting?
Well, because it was a Bungie thing, and like whatever.
Yeah.
It's like So it wasn't long after that I started. I had started working on the Music of the Spheres themes. I had it kind of mapped out. I had each one of the 8 pieces kind of thematically figured out.
Right.
And I had even shown some of that to Paul, and he was like really interested in that. So I didn't know exactly how he wanted to work with us. It was, at the beginning, it was just sort of a tentative thing. I remember coming back to Bungie, and I said, okay, well, this could work. I mean, he might want to work with us. I said, but I think I have to put my fanboy thing away and think about the product. And, first of all, I have to make sure Paul actually trusts me creatively.
Right.
And then number 2, I have to believe that what we do together is better than what we would have done alone. And I remember one of the guys saying, well, how long is that going to take? I was like, yeah, well, if I knew that, right? I mean, it was a big risky thing. And it's when you're talking about creative collaboration, you don't just put people in a room and then magic happens. You don't know if it's going to work, and so it took some effort and different meetings and different studios and combining music together and working together to really get to that point where we felt like we were comfortable with each other. And I went to Abbey Road one time and worked with them at the upstairs studio, and there was an earlier time I met him at Capitol Records in LA after we had done some stuff together. And at the beginning, we were mostly taking ideas that Paul sent me and sort of fleshing them out and making them sort of the way we would make them into game music, and orchestrating them the way we thought would be good. We'd send him back, and he liked what we did. But when I met him at Capitol Records, I went into the studio and I sat at the piano. I had a bunch of stuff to show him, and then he says, well, what's going on with that Music of the Spheres thing? And so I showed him some stuff, and he goes, well, what if some of the stuff I'm giving you gets put into some of that? And I stopped for a second, and I said, and he says, Marty, there's no one in the room, there's no cameras, there's no recording. It's like, you can say whatever you want. I could say, "F you, Marty," and you could say, "F you, Paul." That really happened. And I remember my brain just sort of exploding. I'm like, oh my gosh, did he just say that to me? I would never, it's like I would never.
He just gave you permission to tell him to F off.
I know. You might have to bleep that.
That's okay.
Okay.
This is the internet. No one cares.
It's the internet. So I said, well, Paul, you already told me that if you wanted to really collaborate with someone, you'd call Bob Dylan. He actually had said that at our first meeting. It was about something else, but I remembered him saying that.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, so maybe he's not interested in collaborating. And I said, and you're known as a great collaborator, but you're also known as this great individual artist. I don't know which way you want to work. And he says, oh, no. He says, I love when you take some of my music and add it to your music, and it becomes our music. So as soon as he said that, it was like that was that moment where, he trusted me, and I was convinced that what we could do together would be better than.
And you died on the spot.
I
I'm
did,
talking to a ghost right now.
Yeah, exactly.